That's next week.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know that was kind of loud. I'm sorry, I'm on the radio. My voice tends to project, so let me back away from the mic. Normally we talk like this with mics, sorry. My name is Josh Carmona, also known as Crisco Kid on Party 93.3, the most hip-hop and R&B. Thank y'all for having me here this afternoon. Just a little basic background about me as far as educationally, so you guys can know I know a little bit what I talk about. I went to U of H, graduated 2002, Bachelor of Art. Yep, Cougar in the back, I see him, all right. He threw it up first, it's not a gang sign, it's just a U of H thing, sorry. You graduated in 2002, I've been in radio since 1999, so 9 years deep already, next year be 10, can't wait for that. In my life, I've had a chance and just opportunities to meet so many people living here. I'm from Houston, I moved to New Mexico for 2.5 years and came back in 2005. And I'm really grateful for everybody in this room and the programs and the plans and the things that you guys are implementing in the communities in Houston, statewide, and nationwide. I've seen people in New Mexico, a lot of people in Houston think they have it rough, but New Mexico is a real problem with a lot of people. I know somebody was talking about heroin addiction, talking about the cocaine and just different drugs and different drug courts and programs. And heroin and drug abuse and meth labs is a huge problem out in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and surrounding areas. And so I know the people, I have a couple best friends whose mothers and fathers are addicts, and I've seen it tear people's families apart and tear people's careers and lives apart. So I want to thank you guys for developing programs and finding ways to actually help people to get back on the right track. So that's good right there. Thank you. Also, in the Houston area, the demographic that listens to my radio station, probably between the ages of 12 and 30. So the younger community, the younger areas of town, and it doesn't matter if you're on 1960 to Clear Lake, River Oaks, 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, 2nd Ward, Sunnyside, Southwest, Katy. It doesn't matter. 1960. There's people that suffer the same struggles, no matter what your addiction is, whether it's cocaine, whether it's marijuana, whether it's alcohol. And once again, I've talked with these kids. I've been in schools all the time, and one thing they say is that there's not enough help, there's not enough options to get them off of it. Not that they don't want to, but because they've seen their parents go through it, they've seen their brothers and their sisters actually deal the drugs themselves. So they feel like the only option is for them to get in the drug game. And so once again, I want to thank you guys for developing programs, and hopefully today in the final session that we're about to go into, we can come up with more plans to actually get more drugs off the street and show different alternatives for different children going to different lifestyles, different careers, different education program and paths. So thank you. So we're about to get into the final session of the 2008 Regional Drug Summit. I guess the next session you guys are about to do is put together the principal outline for a regional anti-drug strategy that will have an effect on how we address substance abuse for the next 5 years and perhaps beyond. And the next two speakers we'll have is Mr. Doug Dretke. He's the director of the Correctional Management Institute of Texas, and Dr. Gayleen Armstrong, an associate professor in the College of Criminal Justice and Research at Sam Houston State University. So without further ado, Doug Dretke, please come forward.
Good afternoon. And since we started signatures from our alma maters, that is a Bearcat claw from Sam Houston State University. Anyway, it's an honor to spend just a very few brief minutes. My primary responsibility is introducing Dr. Armstrong, but want to spend just a few quick minutes as you spend time addressing what I think is such a critical issue across our state and country. My background, I've actually only been several years at the Correctional Management Institute at Sam Houston. I actually spent 26 years with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, retiring 2.5 years ago as the director of the Correctional Institutions Division, or the Prisons Division. And so spent a career starting as a correctional officer, moving across the state as a warden, and then as the director of the Prison Division or Correctional Institution Division. And at the Correctional Management Institute, our core focus is the training and professional development of leadership within corrections across the spectrum, including adult, juvenile, community corrections, and juvenile adult institutional corrections, as well as supporting and facilitating research initiatives serving as a bridge between the academic and the practitioner. And much of your work, I think, this afternoon is going to start to focus on that piece of it and the data information pieces. And so as I introduce our research director within our institute, who also serves as a criminal justice professor within our College of Criminal Justice, I want to highlight just a few things from my perspective as a result of spending my career within the criminal justice system, and how critical and impressive this initiative is to have a true impact on Houston and Harris County. It's certainly been recognized and endorsed across the country by national bodies such as the National Institute of Justice and National Institute of Corrections, the absolute need for a collaborative policy team approach in order to have any potential successful outcomes. Your summit these last 2 days has brought together an impressive array of stakeholders and policymakers. And critical to your initiative is establishing the ability to gather the necessary data and information on which to base your strategies, actions, resource allocations, and policies. I don't know if some of your speakers have mentioned, but many of you hopefully have seen last year the Pew Report. Very dramatic title, 1 in 100, and very directly addresses that 1 in 100 of our citizens across this country are in a jail or prison, with a population in jails and prisons across the country of over 2 million. As you start to break down that data between the demographics of what do our prisoners look like across the country, you start to see some very, very disturbing things, as all of you, demonstrated by your presence here, know. The most startling, 1 in 9 of our young black males are incarcerated in a jail or a prison across the country. Recently, Dr. Richard Rosenfeld, professor from Illinois, I think was lecturing at Sam Houston State University. Much of his lecture was focusing on this mass incarceration period of time that our United States has entered into. And one of the somewhat discouraging things of his lecture was that he doesn't see on the horizon anything that convinces him that there is a significant change that will address the dynamics of mass incarceration across our country. But what he did talk about was some of the initiatives and efforts within communities on a reentry focus, on a front-end focus, that are the things that might be the very thing that starts to change dynamics of mass incarceration. When we break that down to right here in Texas, all of you know we have, I think today, somewhere around over 156,000 people incarcerated in prisons. That does not include the jail population, which starts to take you up into 200,000 people. And we release over 70,000 prisoners back into our communities every single year. I think most of you know that a disproportionate amount of our prisoners come from where? Right here in Harris County. And so again, addressing that through your initiatives is so very critical. Focusing on the front with our youth within your community and establishing critical and reliable data through meaningful collaborative efforts is perhaps the most significant component in achieving successful outcomes and trying to change those dynamics. Both of our speakers, or two of my, heard Dr. Jablecki, is that correct? And Judge Crusoe talk about the critical need for evidence-based, basing your decisions on what does the data tell you. In my career in criminal justice, I can probably spend some time talking about a number of initiatives based on faulty data, faulty information. Many of you in your experiences can do the same thing. And so that's why it's so critical that you look at what is the critical information that you need working with the youth, working with your different populations throughout your community to have an impact. And especially in a time of severe economic difficulties that we're dealing with, we know resource allocation is probably the most critical. And so where do you spend those dollars? And so with that, I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Gayleen Armstrong. As I said, she serves as a research director at the Correctional Management Institute, as well as an associate professor in criminal justice. She has been at our university for now going on to 2 years. She came to us from Southern Illinois. Prior to that, Arizona State. Dr. Armstrong is recognized as one of the leading criminal justice researchers across the country, recently being cited as one of the top 20 female criminal justice academicians in our country, has been awarded the American Society of Criminology Division on Corrections and Sentencing Youth Scholar Award for her research, and has also been awarded the Academy of Experimental Criminology's Young Scholar Award, focuses on corrections, juvenile justice, program evaluation. She comes here from, her PhD is from the University of Maryland, and bachelor is from Winnipeg, Canada. And so, very honored to bring her up to the podium. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Ray Andrews for organizing this and asking me to speak with you all with a distinguished group of individuals. I really had a great time listening to some of the lunch speakers, and I was live streaming in thanks to the technology out there yesterday and was able to see Beverly speak and others, so it was fantastic. I'm really excited to hear about what all is going on here. And as Mr. Drecke mentioned earlier, I wear 2 hats most of the time, sometimes 3 and 4, but as the Director of Research and also as a faculty member at the college at Sam Houston State University. And I understand, although we are under a little bit of a time crunch here today, if I talk just long enough, you'll receive some college credit as part of this. And if I see anyone nodding off, there will be a quiz, so hang in there. Today, I'm planning on, just for a few minutes, highlighting some of the knowledge that we've gained on substance abuse research from a researcher perspective, primarily with an emphasis on the importance of data collection and how critical that is to any sort of collaborative effort such as this. Just critical. I was speaking earlier with Cheryl Foland about just even the lack of research that goes on from a cost-benefit perspective right here in our own county and across the nation, unfortunately. Following my talk, I understand there'll be facilitation of group discussion. I'll be making some comments towards the needs for standards for regional uniform data collection. As I was live streaming yesterday, though, in some of your various roles, I heard how each of you self-defined in one way, shape, or form. Some of you rose your hand at being a crime prevention person. Some of you rose your hand at being a provider of services and all different sorts of roles here. But what I want to say is that regardless of however small you feel your role is, each of us makes a ripple if you could conceive substance abuse as a pond, a little ripple in that pond, and myself included. And if you're lucky, you'll make a little bit of a wave in that pond. And if you're fortunate, it's a wave of change. That's not always the case, but we all do have to dig away what is just a critical issue. Similarly, though, unfortunately, much less positively, drug use causes its own ripples. It more easily seems to cause waves, and definitely it causes undercurrents or undertows that seem to just drag our community down in so many ways. Yesterday morning, when Beverly Watts Davis spoke about the relationship between drug use and crime, she noted the rippling effects of substance abuse and how that extends to so many facets of the human and social condition. She mentioned family amongst some of the examples, but just the intergenerational transmission of drug abuse as well as violence, just terrible. So this just serves not to bring us all down after a wonderful lunch, but to underscore the importance of the critical efforts in addressing drug use in a collaborative manner as we work together. We see the impact of drug use in our personal lives and our little roles in so many different ways through our personal observations or workplace, but researchers have also documented a lot of the same personal observations that you've made. Hearing Judge Creuzot speak earlier, we've seen some of those similar experiences that he's had nationwide and in other jurisdictions where you might expect drug use to have different types of impacts. But we indeed see broad trends across the nation, and most of these findings come through having good, solid empirical research where agencies have collaborated or done work on their own to provide strong data collection and strong empirical evidence. And for the first part of my presentation today, I do want to go through a few of those consistent findings with respect to drug use and abuse to give you just a sense of some of the things you may want to consider as we move into the next group facilitated session of having a longer-term plan, thinking about regional data collection and so forth. So the first, I'm going to pose these as fact. To some extent, you may want to argue, but regardless, the first fact, individual drug use of a single individual definitely we know has broader community effects. In the academic world or the university silo, we term this, or academic literature, the community disorganization effect of drugs. What this means is that the norms and behaviors within the drug industry, as I say here up on my point, influence not only the behavior of the users, but also the behavior of those not involved directly in the drug industry. The community disorganization effect also results in a breakdown of violence-inhibiting social control mechanisms. When you're too afraid to go out and meet your neighbor, when you're not as willing to look down the street and tell little Jimmy he ought to be in school because you don't even know little Jimmy's mom or his name or any of that, it breaks down that social fabric that we would like to have in our communities. What you also see in terms of community effects is the outmigration of stable families, those positive influences, especially those individuals with ties to the legitimate economy. Ms. Davis mentioned about how the influence of drugs in a neighborhood has that direct economic impact. We see that impact of drug use in both the economic and social influences in our communities. We see it in the schools, and we see it with the families within these communities. Finally, we can't rule out the relationship with violence, the diffusion of guns into drug-infested neighborhoods, despite the best efforts of our law enforcement individuals. Second, as I would call it, a fact is that addiction doesn't discriminate by ethnicity, race, gender, age, socioeconomic status, though some trends do exist. We've heard both the judge speak as well as others speak throughout these past 2 days that this is not a white problem, this is not a black problem, this is not a Hispanic problem. It's not just men, it's not just women. When you see, it hits home with me, a tenured female professor have a methamphetamine addiction, or your daughter who's going to high school and she's worried about her prom dress fitting just right, and she tries methamphetamine, as they are in Southern Illinois, where I just came from, to lose those couple extra pounds, and then you see her get addicted. That's not the kind of person we think of as having a social problem or a crime problem. It's everywhere. But again, trends do exist, so this is some of what the data will tell us. With respect to gender and drug use, and I don't want you to have to take notes, I'd be happy to share this with you. You're not in class today anyhow. Gender and drug use, males we know are more likely to use than females with respect to all substances. In some figures from 2006, I do try and note my sources at the bottom, but can follow up if you're interested in the specific study. But with respect to alcohol, males typically have higher rates of usage or consider themselves current drinkers. In this specific study, we saw 57% compared to 45% in females. I don't want you to only concentrate on the difference between gender, but look at those rates overall. And this is just alcohol. And on through the ages, down through our youth as well, where you have 16 and 17% of males and females consider themselves current drinkers by self-report. Well, you can't even drink until you're 21, and 1 in 5 consider themselves current drinkers, and this is self-report information. These same patterns and trends extend to various types of drugs depending on how you categorize them. What is consistent in the darker bar graph, if you can see it, are the males consistently tend to be higher users. This is the past month of use of various types of drugs. So overall, we do know that males, to an extent, trend towards having a higher usage rates and consider themselves current users more frequently than females. Although we are closing the gender gap, ladies, way to go. We are now also becoming high-level users. When you speak about race and drug use, various data sources show slightly different rates of use. We tend to see highest rates among American Indian and Alaskan Natives by proportional perspectives and those of mixed race, depending on how you classify within your individual study, whereas those of Asian descent report some of the lowest usages. Rates of some drugs, as this point notes, of some drugs are comparable between black and white. However, most categories, white outpaces that of blacks, and in Texas we're seeing something very unique I'll talk about in a minute with respect to those of Hispanic ethnicity. This is just some information from the high school students who are self-reporting their drug use by race and ethnicity, and my point here, as you look at the different groups, we have lifetime marijuana use followed by a group of bars for current marijuana use. Not only high levels, but each of those individual colors represent different races or ethnicities, and we're not seeing that it's a problem of one group in a community. This is, as you know, a critical issue across all groups. And that is similar to when you get into some of the very serious heroin, methamphetamine, ecstasy, and then other kinds of drugs like steroids that are used in our high schools by our youth. Remember, these are high school students reporting. One of the issues that is unique to Texas that we're experiencing is that Hispanic youth have a very different look as compared to other groups when you categorize by race and ethnicity, whereas whites, blacks will focus in on marijuana or cocaine or other kinds of groups. What we see within our Hispanic youth is that they are true experimenters. They will try all kinds of different drugs with all kinds of different impacts, all kinds of different treatment issues related to that, and addiction issues. We're seeing Hispanic youth report the highest rates of lifetime use or the past month use for all of these: alcohol, inhalant, marijuana, crack cocaine, Rohypnol, heroin, tobacco use. Okay? And again, these are youth. These are not full-blown adults, so it gives you an idea of some of the concerns that we have. Again, doesn't discriminate by age. We have drug issues across the spectrum. Yes, illicit substance use does decrease with age, but we are actually seeing a rise, as some of these different graphs will show you, with some of our older baby boomer population. We are succeeding in one area, and that is likely due to some of the increased prevention efforts that we've focused on, as you talked about, Beverly, with some of the youth, the young kids. We are starting to see a decrease in drug use. That's great, but it is still unacceptably too high. Unacceptable. We are seeing a decrease with our youth. This graph shows between 2002 and 2006, clumped together by the ages listed at the bottom. Between 12 and 17, we are seeing a decrease. But across all the other age groups, we are seeing either stability or an increase. When you start looking at those who are 50 to 54 and even on to 59 to an extent, we're seeing rises, and that has a whole different implication when you start thinking about treatment of elderly individuals with respect to addiction. It's a whole different ballgame, possibly. Well, there is promise with decreased use in some of the younger ages as those trends to some extent decline over the years, but where we are not seeing a decline is with respect to alcohol, especially within Texas. The effects of alcohol abuse are tragic. Just to pick one example of how you might measure the impact of drug abuse or alcohol abuse, is with respect to what the law enforcement see too often is the alcohol-related traffic fatalities. Alcohol-related traffic fatalities, although they've declined in recent years nationally, the nature and extent of drunk driving remains a significant social problem. There were over, and the statistic was already quoted earlier today, 1.3 million arrests, according to the FBI UCR Uniform Crime Reports data, and over 16,000 fatalities, 16,000 too many fatalities, some of which are not those individuals who are consuming, but just innocent victims driving on their way home from their son's soccer game, for example. According to the Uniform Crime Reports, we've had almost as many offenders arrested from drunk driving as for drug abuse violations, to a total of 3 million individuals. So my point with pointing out the alcohol abuse issue is don't forget about the alcohol as we focus on some of those very serious new drugs and new trends with some of the illicit substances. Alcohol, that which is available right down your street in the grocery store, having huge issues within our youth and elderly population as well. Again, traffic accidents are only one way, and traffic fatalities one way of considering the effects of alcohol and alcohol abuse on victimization and other ways, but just astronomically high statistics given that we have had alcohol around and know how to socially control some of that. Back to what else do we know as a result of some of the data and facts that we've collected and gathered? We know for a fact that there is a relationship between drug use and crime. Now, if you took my statistics and methods class, you would have a long talk about the difference between being correlational and causational. Those are two distinct things. One, correlational happening at the same time. The other, causational, one thing causing the other. We know there is a relationship. Do we know it's causal? Not necessarily. Intuitively, do we think that at some point for some individuals it's causal? Sure. But at minimum, we know they're correlational, happening at the same time. Our operating premise within the criminal justice system as a whole and correction specific is that if we can reduce drug use, it'll mean a corresponding decrease in criminal activity. Focusing specifically on our incarcerated population, those who you can contain and measure, reports by the National Institute of Justice through the DUF that later became the Adam Project, amongst other efforts, found that depending on the urban area, you have between 52 and 80% of male arrestees who test positive for drug use. And you can talk to any law enforcement official, anyone who's worked as a detention officer in a jail, the kinds of issues that are associated with dealing with those offenders who are either high or drunk at the time of their arrest, not only affecting the safety of our communities, but the safety of our officers as well. When you look to some of the statistics provided by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, who surveys jail inmates, their most recent report put out on their survey that's done every few years, specifically found that 68%, that's over 2/3 of jail inmates, reported symptoms in the year before they came into jail that met not just use, let me underscore that, but substance dependence or abuse criteria. Serious drug problems. 3 in 4 convicted property or drug offenders also met substance abuse or dependence criteria. Now, what are the other factors that are associated with some of this use. If you look at the last set of points here, jail inmates who have met the criteria for substance abuse or dependence, so looking at that subset of individuals, they were more likely for a number of things. Number one, to have a prior criminal record. Number two, to have been homeless in the year before their offense. Number three, to have grown up with a parent or guardian who abused alcohol or drugs. Some of these facts start to point to some of the complexities of that we deal with in terms of drug issues. There's another fact. There's a relationship between drug use and victimization. Not necessarily causal, one thing causing the other, but the two things happen at the same time too often. There are so many complexities to the critical issue that we're addressing as this group. The co-occurring disorders, speaking to mental illness, co-occurring with substance use. How do you treat that kind of person? What do you treat first? It's just a difficult issue. The relationship between homelessness and drug use. Not only does that lead to quality of life disorder, but also victimization of individuals. Some of the studies that have been done here, 2005, I believe, was the study right here in Harris County, that there's between 12 and 15,000 young adults who are considered homeless at any one time. Of those, 58% had alcohol issues who are also homeless, or substance issues. Those are high numbers. Try and, as we said, you try to focus on getting clean. How do you get clean when you don't even know where you're going to sleep or where you're going to eat or your workplace? Another huge issue, fetal alcohol syndrome. Our users, the women, are rising. We're closing that gender gap. These are the same people engaging in other kinds of risky behaviors, such as failure to use contraceptive, risky sexual behavior. What is the result? You know, pregnancy, fetal alcohol syndrome follows. Now we start to see this generational transmission, challenges that the children with fetal alcohol syndrome bring to the school environment, and they're not even users. They have long-term negative effects. Histories of abuse for individuals and how that affects their future use of alcohol. Domestic violence and how substance use plays into that, both in terms of victimization but also in the aggressor. Where we see some of the criminal justice research becoming very clear when you start to talk about the complexity of drug issues is with respect to the female offender population. The convergence between trauma experienced, substance abuse, and mental health places women into pathways to crime that are inherently different from male offenders. Early victimization of girls, we know, leads to low self-esteem, depression, low self-concept, all of which may foster drug use. It may lead to re-victimization, and it may also lead to adult criminality. The trajectory for these women are not comparable to men, and what that requires is a unique, what we're now starting to term gender-specific treatment. Those of you who are providers, you've known this all along, but it's taken a while for the rest of us to catch up that women are different. Well, all you guys know that. I'm married. Not only are we different, but we're also a challenge in terms of treatment. So all of this different information that I'm sharing with you today really underscores the importance, I hope you'll see, of collecting data. We have identified national trends, we've identified new issues, we started to identify some fact-based information with respect to the complexity that we're dealing with here. All of that stems from sharing our knowledge. Fortunately, our research-based knowledge from a criminal justice perspective continues to grow with promising solutions. You heard earlier a lot about the drug courts. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, the success we've seen with the adult drug courts, the promise that it holds for juveniles with juvenile drug courts, and what we're doing right here in Harris County with DWI courts are all very exciting. All based, though, within, or needing to be based if they're not, but primarily based within good empirical knowledge. We also know, we also know that these offenders have a huge financial drain on the U.S. As a whole, but the criminal justice specifically. No matter how you slice and dice, it depends how you count these beans versus those beans. What you can't argue is that it's expensive. Depending on how you calculate the cost, you can come up with any kind of dollar figure, but one study that probably is on the high side, but giving you an idea, in Texas in general, $10 billion cost of alcohol and drug abuse. When you start thinking about time lost from work, criminal justice costs, foregone productivity, and so forth. Health risks as well are just a huge issue, and those of you in the health field are aware of that. All of this is to tell you that successful comprehensive approach is the answer to addressing some of the information needs that we have. There are successful cases all across the country, some that have approached violence prevention generally, some that have focused more specifically on groups of offenders like sex offenders, juveniles, female offenders, and so forth. What some of those initiatives have in common are they examine the policies that drive the practices, they examine the actual practices that occur, they importantly have an empirical basis for those policies and don't leave out the philosophies that are behind those policies and practices. Again, I can't underscore enough that the assessment of practice is key. It should be ongoing, not a single event. Decision makers benefit, stakeholders benefit, and we must keep in mind principles of risk responsivity and needs that we've come to learn through the drug abuse treatment literature and apply those in our practices. We can't be happy with the status quo. We must be on the edge of information as we move forward. The last emphasis I want to place is that sharing information learned from various assessments is critical. Not just key, but critical. It results in specialized knowledge. We share that knowledge. It can lead to improved training of those involved in the field, and key stakeholders need to share that specialized knowledge to enhance their own individual work. Leadership through this is vital. We're in economic crises, you all know that, and we need to make sure that we have leaders who can see us through that time. A lack of information is bad, but worse than that is misinformation. So as you move into this next section, what we'll really be talking about is what information do you have, do you collect, that you can then share with others so that we can all work together instead of making individual ripples or individual waves, create a tidal wave that's going to wash out drug use in our area. So thank you very much and good luck as we continue with this critical issue.
Hello. How y'all doing? Y'all are nice. All right, I like this. How y'all doing? My name is Kiadi, Party 93.3. I do the night show. Crisco Kid had to step out to take care of some radio business. So, I had to step on in. Right now, I need everybody to please give a hand to Mr. Doug Drecke and Dr. Galen Armstrong for their insightful and motivational comments. I learned a lot. I was sitting here learning. It's interesting. Oh, okay, now check this out. Right now, about to bring back Dr. Robert Landry, who is going to lead audience members through the final and one of the most important mapping strategy and work sessions. A call to action, the plan, mapping strategy work session. So, right now, without any further ado, let's bring up Dr. Robert Landry.
I don't know what I do to get 3 introductions in 2 days. I thought about it, either I'm real important or everybody forgets who I am, one of the two. Okay, the session this afternoon, and what we're going to do is try to condense it down. The session that we were scheduled to do this morning on the strategy planning, we're going to move this afternoon. The last piece about looking at short-term, long-term outcomes we'll complete if we have time. But the most important thing that we want to achieve is identifying those strategies you need to put in place for the needs that you got yesterday. So one of the things we need to do is work in the same groups that we were in yesterday. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, you can fall into any one of the working groups that are here. We would ask that the first thing you do in the working group is go through the priorities that were discussed yesterday and identified yesterday in each one of the groups. Okay, then we want to identify those strategies that you need to successfully remediate the needs you identified yesterday. Now, on the worksheets, there is a priority 1 strategies list, a priority 2 strategies list, and a priority 3 strategies list. So work through those, identify the strategies for each of the priorities. Then we want to move those priorities to the action plan, which is the last sheet in your group. And with those strategies, identify the tasks that need to be completed in order to make the strategy successful. Okay? We have any questions? Now, I'm going to go back and talk about some of Einstein's theories here. You know, Einstein pointed out that at some point there's a direct relationship between speed and time. Well, this is that point. Okay? We don't have much time, work real fast. All right? So we've got approximately an hour to complete this task. And it's a formidable task to do in that length of time. I will be here on the floor. If you have questions, you need help, ask. On the table for each of you is the red and blue book from NIDA. The red and blue book has evidence-based strategies and evidence-based activities that have been shown and demonstrated to be successful. If you have a question about selecting evidence-based strategies, look through that book, or you can raise your hand and we'll be glad to come by and help you with that. All right? So other than not wanting to take up any more of your time, let's go ahead and get busy as a group and see if we can map out those strategies.